Thanks very much. And I actually want to start with some thanks and some acknowledgements here. It's usual to start with the acknowledgements and then the thanks, I understand, but I actually want to do it the other way around for reasons that will hopefully become clear. So firstly, I'd like to say that the Geoethics series is sponsored by the American Association of Geographers in partnership with the Center for Spatial Studies at the University of California, Santa Barbara, and with the support of ESRI, and many thanks to them. Secondly, this sort of event is not possible without the support of the AAG Logistics Start team led by Colleen Doney, and she has had the help of Lisa Chames, Oscar Larson, Ellen Thornton, Gelati Leiper, and many, many thanks to them. Thirdly, this sort of event is not possible without organization. So huge thanks from all of us to the inexhaustible and indefatigable Bettina Michael for both the vision and the organization and the energy and social network and the extraordinary goodwill that she's created in that social network to get everybody together. Fourthly, and I know Katina would acknowledge this, making a workshop of this type is a collective action problem, and it does require the time, will, and energy of a good number of people to contribute to the common pool of thought. And honestly, there's an amazing range of really brilliant speakers lined up here, and my only problem is that I'm actually in the UK at the moment, and it's already past midnight. But I would really like to stay around and listen to them, because the scale of humanity and the depth of thought collected here is truly awesome, but thanks to everybody in advance who's taking part to share their ideas. And finally, without an audience, a workshop is the sound of one hand clapping. So also enormous thanks to all the participants for your time and attention. And I know everyone is looking forward to engaging with you. So that's the acknowledgements of and thanks to people and organizations, but the acknowledgement, the other acknowledgement that I've been encouraged to do and indeed would like to do is the acknowledgement to country. Now, I have never done one of these before, but someone emailed a possible text, and I would like to say it now seriously and respectfully, but I am rather well known for never knowingly underanalyzing anything. And so then I'd like to say it and then analyze it, because it has some implications, I think, for today's session. So with seriousness and respect, before we begin our session this morning, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting and pay my respect to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Now, I would like to take 3 points from this. Firstly, that text does actually refer to the traditional owners of the land, but in my limited understanding and to some schools of thought, the concept of people owning land is sort of like asking what is north of the North Pole, or what is outside the universe, or what the time was before the Big Bang. It just doesn't conceptually make any sense. And if anything, the land owned you. Yeah? And so that the idea that anyone could come along and put a fence around some land and say, right, that belongs to me, and everything grown on there belongs to me, and any animal on there belongs to me, and you can't even go there, the reaction would be, what on earth, are you actually talking about? And this distinction or inversion, if you like, is important, because if instead of land you think of data, especially of data in the context of human beings making the transition from being a data processor to being a data processor and a data generator. And as a data generator, not just in terms of creativity, but also every action that you take, every decision that you make, every interaction that you have, every bodily function that you can think of that someone has devised a sensor to measure it, it doesn't make sense to say that, you know, I own this data. I'll come back to this point, of course. The second point to make is that the irony of being from the soon-to-be disunited kingdom and employed by an institution that rather proudly calls itself Imperial College means that, generally speaking, it was actually my elders who were largely responsible for the fact that we have to make an acknowledgement to country at all. And for this, I would actually like to sincerely apologize and express my regret that there are some who simply refuse to engage in an honest appraisal of this particular period of history, or acknowledge where fortunes and privileges were actually derived from. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that reparations are necessary, but at least it would be good to own up to the history and acknowledge it. And this is important to it because admitting to it, at least, is a precursor to establishing a more equitable and fairer world. And this does lead to my third point, which is in acknowledging a historical tendency to colonization, we shouldn't assume that colonization is actually a thing of the past. That tendency is with us now, but just in a slightly more modern guise. I mean, to be brutally frank, the UK is experiencing some sort of neo-colonialism or self-colonialism at the moment. We are governed by a group of people who are in the country, own it, rule it, but do not think that any of those rules actually apply to them. Their primary interest is not the people, but their own self-enrichment and the enrichment of their clique through wealth extraction and rentier capitalism. And indeed, one post-Brexit joke has it that the English are now finding out what it is like to be ruled by the English. The thing is, as society undergoes this transformative process, the digital society, we see two things. First, there is the well-discussed idea of the digital divide between those who are connected and tech-savvy and those who are not. The result is very much the Matthew effect. To those that have, it shall be given. So if you can afford to install PV cells on your roof and own an electric vehicle, then in stormy weather, you can actually be paid to charge your vehicle. While at the same time, there are huge numbers of people suffering from energy poverty. And they are faced that same night with the decision, do I heat my house or do I heat my food? Now, where I would ask you is the social justice is that. And social justice is a theme that I will return to. The second thing, though, amongst those who are connected, there is another divide, and it seems to be rather less noticed, or if it has been noticed, it's much less discussed. And this is the divide between those who have power in the digital transformation and those who do not. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, we've already seen one example of this. Some people have the power to put a digital fence around data and say that this is theirs, despite the fact that the data was generated by someone else, or rather, lots of someone else's. Now, it may be that the data is exchanged for a location-based service of some kind, but the exchange is hardly symmetric. The value of the aggregated data is far greater than the sum of the value of the services provided. This is just not an equitable exchange. This is simply digital extraction, and there is no social justice or dignity in this. Another example is how the network effect, the platform economy, or platformization, I've seen it called, means that work is done at the edge and revenue accrues in the center. So this effectively gives power to the platform owner, in particular power over the means of social coordination. And this is where I could get really quite neo-Marxist, because if Marx rejected the idea of private ownership of the means of production, then I would like to reject the private ownership of the means of social coordination and have public ownership as a way of restoring some element of social justice. A third example of this, and something else we see, is marginalization of the disadvantaged or less privileged communities in the digital sphere, and indeed marginalization of the very idea of community itself. One thing is clear, and I don't want to steal anybody else's thunder, well, I couldn't, because she can do this much better than I could ever. But frankly, the way young people are being treated in the digital transformation at the moment is absolutely appalling. From the diminution of their education in critical thinking through to design of addictive technology, they are rendered powerless on two fronts, privacy and attention. See, as a data generator, you have a right not to be observed, and unless you want to be, and this is what we call privacy. But as a data processor, you also have a right not to be interrupted. You own the power of the prefrontal cortex, the thing that's doing all the processing. This is your attention, and you should have an inalienable right not to have that attention monopolized by someone's manufactured addiction to, for example, infinite scrolling. And the marginalization of the idea of community itself is that we are not seeing people being empowered to take control over local situations. Because, of course, we have to remember that all of these digital systems are eventually embedded in the real world. But time and again, I'm sure everybody's seen examples of this, smart cities projects, which are not designed from lived experience, but driven by a technological or financial imperative with individuals who are fragmented and just reduced to locked-in revenue streams. So I pursued this theme in an article based on Simone Veil's identification of roots in a community or school or work and family. But what we're seeing through some combination of digital technology and political malfeasance has served to deroot the young and significantly marginalize them. A fourth example is the same ownership of information sources and information reporting. I urge you all to read the Oreskes and Conway book entitled The Merchants of Doubt, which shows how vested interests have actually used the scientific method against itself. The way you do this is you set up an AstroTurf Institute, call it something like, I don't know, impressive sounding like the Foundation for Global Public Health, get it to output a white paper saying that, oh, I don't know, taking with some random example, hydroxychloroquine treats some virus or other, but this white paper is never published in a peer-reviewed journal, but it is reported in online newspapers and social media. And a proper scientist comes along, debunks the claim and says, now maybe you should get vaccinated instead. And this is published in a proper journal, but note it is not reported in the online media. And so this means that half the people that have been lied to, half believe what's going on, and no one can really know what the truth is. But what is true is it turns out that the owner of this AstroTurf Institute and the owner of the social media are one and the same, and therein lies their power, and those who are being misinformed and disinformed are rendered powerless in their choices. Fifth example is the iron triangle of mutual support between big tech, Congress or Parliament, and the browbeaten academia. So the Congress makes the law on taxes, doesn't fund academia. Big tech has the money, so it funds the political campaigns who makes those laws. Yeah, and you know, the academics are then forced to churn out PhD students for whom we still haven't had the time to teach them the critical thinking skills, so they are just smart enough to operate equipment, but not so smart that they will start asking any difficult questions, like, is it really that good an idea to put a microphone and some artificial intelligence in everyone's kitchens? And so they can scrape all the data of what is a location-based service that as far as I can see, is a gimmick at best. We're just swapping our humanity for convenience. And I ask again, where is the social justice and dignity in all this? Now, let me just finish up, one more minute, Katina. The thing is, none of this perhaps would matter quite so much if it weren't for the scale. The combination of the miniaturization of devices, the ubiquity of the network, the size of the warehouse processing capabilities, the capacity of the memory and the storage, is that the extent of data collection and the opportunity for surveillance and the division of power is now actually taking place on a planetary scale. So now I'd like to think that I'm bringing together three threads, which I understand Katina would like to see analysed in some detail in this workshop. The triad, firstly, of geosurveillance, and actually not just geosurveillance, but geosurveillance and geo-uberveillance as well, the provision of location-based services, and thirdly, social justice. So, of course, my answer to this would involve value-sensitive design and values-based engineering. And it's great to see IEEE coming up with a standard to promote this. But I also believe that we should follow in the late and great and sorely missed Elinor Ostrom's footsteps and find out what works in delivering social justice in the analog world and see how we could reproduce that in the digital world. So the answer of Ostrom, and indeed other political scientists like Josiah Ober, has rested in our human capacity for endless invention, especially our ability to make up rules, and to make up rules which allow for self-determination, interactional justice, and legitimate governance. In short, we need a lot more democracy, and we need a lot more respect for civic dignity in the digital transformation. And I hope that the talks and the discussion will contribute to this program. With that, thank you very much, and I wish you a very exciting, interesting, informative, and enjoyable workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy Pitt, for those wonderful opening remarks that have set the tone for the whole day. Thank you for all the work you've contributed on collective awareness, collective action, and your understanding of governance. Democracy by design has been something that I know you've credited to others, but you have helped very much develop in the literature. And we are so honored that you opened and also co-hosted this event. Thank you for staying up as long as you have.